Hey guys, this is Laura from the Sketching Pad. I'm going to show you how to paint this dream catcher today. So if you haven't checked out the intro video, go ahead and do that, especially if this is your first time painting, but otherwise we're going to get started. So this background is a very pale blue. So in your kit, you're going to get some white and a pot of blue, and you're going to take your plate and we're going to mix this color on here. So the thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to take a few big scoops of the white, and we're going to mix just a little bit of blue into it. So this is a lot of background, so I want to make sure that I have enough paint to cover it all. So I'm going to start with that much, and then I'm going to take my blue pod. You can just open it up, and I'm going to take a small scoop of blue. I'm not even really going to rinse my brush because I don't want to waste the paint that's on there. So I'm just going to dip into that pod and take about a scoop this much, and then mix that in thoroughly. Now, obviously, this is a very pale background, but your background can be darker or lighter, or even a different color if you want it to. We've got a lot of colors in this kit because, you know, all of our little feathers are multicolored. So if you didn't want your background to be blue and you wanted it to be like a light purple or something like that, just use the purple instead. Okay, so I like that color, but I'm going to add just a little bit more white to it. So I'm going to take just a little bit more, and that's just because I don't think I have enough paint, and mix that in. Okay, and then to make it a little bluer, because I added more white, I'm just going to add some more blue to it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to start in one section and work my way around. So I'll just start in the bottom area here, but you could start at the top. And as you go, I suggest kind of tracing your edge. This image was sketched on here with a darker marker, so you will be able to see your pencil lines or the line work if you go over it accidentally. So don't really be concerned about that. But you know, if you can avoid covering your covering those little feathers, that's always best. And if you have a large canvas, the 16 by 20, you want to also make sure that you cover your edges. So that's this portion here. It will just make hanging it on a wall a little bit more professional, a little bit more attractive. But if you're going to frame it, then that doesn't matter. So the reason why I like to work in one section at a time instead of jumping around the whole canvas is that the paint kind of blends together best if you're working on that wet edge. So what you put down is still wet while you're adding more paint. So we're going to focus on doing the outside first, and then we'll work on the inside of those circles. You can see I'm being pretty loose with it. Now I'm just doing a flat color. I'm doing just the light shade of blue, but if you wanted more texture in this background, it's already going to give you a little bit of texture. But if you wanted more variation in the color, what you could do is you could just dip straight into the white pod. You could add that, kind of blend that in on the edges, and it will give you like a fuzzy look instead of it being so flat. But we're also going to be adding splatters to the background, so that's going to add a little bit more dimension as well. While I was talking, I just jumped down here to this edge, this wet edge down here. But if you're following the same pattern that you were doing before, you keep doing that. So you just keep on painting, going around those edges and filling it all in. You may notice that I'm not using any particular brush strokes. I'm just going in any direction that my brush feels most comfortable. Like when I'm doing the edges of the feathers, I'm just like kind of tracing the edge and using long, smooth strokes like that. That seems to work better in most cases for getting a clean edge. But we're not too concerned about the clean edge on the background. The reason why we usually start with the background is because it's the easiest thing to fix if we go in the lines of something else. So like these will cover those rougher edges as we have them. If you've ever painted with us before or purchased another kit, we like to call this phase the awkward phase of painting. For like 80% of the painting process, your image is going to look a little bit crazy. Like it's not going to look exactly how you expected it to look because everything's all streaky, or you know, you've got those rough edges like I was just talking about down here, and it's not finished yet, so you don't want to judge it too quickly when your painting is in that awkward phase. It just makes sense that your painting is not going to look perfect when you're not done with it yet. So just be patient with yourself and keep on going and press through till the end. So now that I've got my background in here, we're going to do the center. Now the center is the same color, but this is a good time to check your quantity of paint. If you need to go ahead and remix your color, go ahead and do that before you start on the inside. So I'm going to mix just a little bit more. It's a little bit safer also to do it that way because trying to remix the same color when the paint is touching each other, so if you have to mix the same color halfway through, it's really easy to get that color slightly off. But when you're doing it on the inside of the circle, because we're going to do this outside edge, it's not crucial that that blue is exactly the same. So I'm just going to grab some more white, grab some more blue. So this is pretty close to what I had before. It's a tiny bit bluer, but it's not going to make any difference because it's on the inside of that circle. And we're just going to paint over our lines. Now on the camera, you may not be able to tell, but I can see these lines underneath. As long as you're spreading out your paint pretty smooth, you're going to be able to see it. If you cover it too thick, then you will have a little bit more trouble seeing your lines. But one thing to keep in mind with this is that the acrylic paint, when it's drying, as it dries, it gets more transparent than when it's wet. So if you're not seeing it right now, when it dries, you will be able to see it. then you're just going to do the same thing on the inside, kind of trace your circle around the edge. Don't worry so much about being perfect, and then just let it dry at this point so we can do the rest of the feathers. You may find it handy to use a blow dryer. Otherwise, if you don't have access to a blow dryer, you can just let it dry for like 10 or 15 minutes. A way to tell whether or not it's dry or still wet is when you hold the painting to the side and you kind of tilt it like this, you'll see little high reflective points, like it'll be glossier looking where it's wet and a little bit more matte where it's dry. So you'll be able to tell a little bit more easily if you kind of hold the painting to the side, or if you like change your angle and look at it on the edge. So once we're finished with this, we're gonna do our splatters. I'm gonna go ahead and dry it. Alrighty guys, so I changed my angle so that we can see the splatters better. It's always a good idea if you have an easel to lay your canvas down on a flat surface when you're splattering, and that's so that they don't run down your canvas when it's held upright, because we are going to be adding some water to our paint. Usually you don't want to do that if you're trying to get flat coverage, but when you're trying to get these little water droplets, you really want to make sure that the paint is watered down. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have, in this sample, you're going to be using colors that go with the colors of the feathers that you've picked. So in this one, we've got blue and we've got purple and we've got pink. You can choose different colors if you'd rather, like you could use the green instead. It doesn't really matter. You could also do a combination, like you could lighten it with some white. So it just doesn't really matter all that much what you do. You don't have to do 3 colors. You could do 1 color. You could do 2 colors. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to be adding some water from our container to each of the colors. So I'm going to take a scoop. I'm just going to start with the pink. It doesn't really matter which one you start with. I'm going to add it to the corner of my plate. So just 1 scoop. And then I'm going to take my water, and you can like dump just a little bit if you're careful off the edge. So you really want to be careful with it if you're going to dump it in, but you could also do, let me slide this over. This will help you guys see. So if you have your cup here, you can take and scoop some water with your brush and kind of mix that slurry together. And you want to make sure that it's thoroughly mixed. Sometimes it's easy to get clumps in there. So you just keep mixing and mixing, and you can see it's pretty runny. It's about a half water, half paint ratio that you're going for. And then you're going to take your small brush, and you're going to take that size 8 round brush, and you're going to hit down with the size 8 round brush to cover your canvas. So you're just going to take that and hit it until you get the amount of splatters that you like. Now I'm going to be adding other splatter colors to this, so I don't want to take up too much with the pink. Your splatters are going to look a little different than mine. Now, if you are finding that the paint is not coming off of your brush very easily, that just means that you don't have enough water. So you can just take a couple more scoops from your water cup and stir it in and then try again. Something to keep in mind is that the splattering is a little bit messy. So if you have a table, if you're doing this on your dining room table that you don't want to get any paint on, then you probably want to throw down a tarp or something, or a tablecloth, just to be safe. So I'm just going to grab another plate. But if you don't have any other plates around, you can just take a paper towel and wipe the paint out of the bottom. and then go to your next color. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to take my blue. This is the same blue that I used for my background. And then I just take a scoop, and then I'm going to take my water, and I'm going to carefully pour some water into that plate. If you're going to do the pouring to get the water onto the plate, make sure that you don't have it above your painting. I know that I do right now, but that's just because I want to keep it in the camera frame. But you got to be really careful. So if you're pouring it, just make sure that you don't have it over your canvas, or we could end up with a little bit of a mess. So I'm going to take that plate and put it to the side. And then I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to tap that blue all over. So you're just going to move your hands to coat it evenly. Okay, so we're going to do our next color. I'm going to do the purple. Okay, so we're going to take that purple, grab a scoop of the purple, and put it onto the plate. Take our cup and pour just a little bit. You could also, if you want to, if you're afraid to pour out of that cup, you could use the faucet, like set it on really, really low, and then just put your plate underneath the faucet stream for like a half second, and that will be plenty of water. Okay. All right, so we're going to take and just do the same thing and add that purple. Okay. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that amount. I'm going to do just a little bit more in the middle here and a little bit more in the middle there. Make sure you don't have your brush too close to the canvas, or you might accidentally hit your brush onto the canvas itself. So leave about, 2 inches gap between your brushes and the canvas. All right, so this part is going to take a little bit longer to dry. I don't recommend you blow dry it immediately, or you're going to send your splatters all over the place. So just wait for it to air dry for like 15 minutes by itself, and then you can blow dry it the rest of the way. We just want to make sure that the main amount of water that was mixed in there has evaporated, so we don't end up with shooting stars all over the canvas. You might want to set your blow dryer on low just to make sure that it doesn't do anything to it before you turn it on high. So I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alrighty, so now we are going to move on to our feathers. You want to make sure that you're mixing a tiny bit of white into whatever colors you do use. It just makes it cover a little bit more. So just grab that same size 8 round brush that you have been using, and then we're going to scoop a few colors onto the plate. So we're going to take our blue, we're going to scoop a little bit of blue on there. And we're going to take a little tiny scoop of white. Now, if you're concerned about the white getting dirty when you put your dirty brush into it, you can either rinse your brush or you can scoop the white first. Either way is totally fine, whatever makes most sense to you. Then you're just going to take that round brush and you're going to trace your edges. Now, you may find it more comfortable to use the detail brush for these. And that is totally fine if that is what you're comfortable with. I will do a couple. I will do a few feathers with each of the brushes just so you can see the difference. But if you do decide to use the small brush, it's just keep in mind that it doesn't hold as much paint, so it can be a little bit harder to cover the whole thing. Whereas the larger brush does hold a lot of paint. So it puts more on at a time, but it can be a little bit harder to get into small spaces. So it's really just about your personal comfort level. So these feathers are going to need 2 coats each to make them look nice and smooth. They probably look smooth on your from the screen here, but you're probably going to notice on your own that it needs more than 1 coat. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. So I'm going to take a scoop of the white and put that on my plate, and then a scoop of the pink and put that on my plate too. Now the more white you have, the lighter that pink's going to be, and the more pink you have, obviously the brighter it's going to be. So you just kind of mix it together until you get a color that you're happy with. I'll show you how to use the smaller brush for this one. So if you dip that small brush into the paint, you may want to twirl your brush a little bit to evenly coat the bristles, and then you're just going to trace the edges. You'll probably notice that this color is a little bit more transparent than the blue. That's just because lighter colors, including the yellow, you'll notice the yellow is going to be pretty light too when you do that. But when you go over it a second time, it will cover much better. So you notice that I'm having to re-dip my brush multiple times into the pile of pink to get enough paint on the brush and to make it smooth and not gappy. That's not anything that you're doing wrong. It's just because it's a smaller brush, so it naturally holds less paint. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over here, and then I'm going to show you how to mix the green. I'm going to do from the right to the center. So we'll do the purple and yellow first, and then we'll do the green in the middle. So let's grab that purple pod. And I prefer to mix my colors with the larger brush rather than the smaller brush. And the reason for that is because the small brush can get worn out and messed up a little bit more quickly than the large brush does. So I just prefer to mix, which kind of spreads those bristles out more than painting does. Okay, so I'm going to use this brush just because that's what I have on hand right now. That's what's in my hand. And then just fill it in. You'll probably notice it's a little bit thin as well. The purple is, the purple is kind of strange because the purple is a darker color, but still it's pretty transparent. So you're just going to have to do your second coat to get it the way you want. Now mine's a little bit lighter than our example. If you want it to be a little darker, you could mix a little bit of blue into it. It will be more of a blue violet than a true purple. But that's an option for you as well if you want to get that thick, darker color. Now we're going to go for that yellow. So just make sure that if you've got like any blue or purple in your pod, just make sure that you don't mix that into the yellow, or you're going to end up with like green or brown depending on which of those two colors you grab. So just make sure to be mindful of that, and then just mix the yellow and white together, and then we're gonna just add it in place with whichever brush you want. Okay. All right, now that green. The green is a little bit different than if you want this green down here. It's a little bit different than just adding green and white together, because this green is kind of a blue-green. And the blue-green, if you just mix white into it, will be a little bit too cool. It'll be like too minty. So I'm going to grab some white, and then I'm going to grab some green, a couple scoops of green, and then I'm going to grab some of that mustardy color that comes in the kit. That mustardy color is going to make that green more of a warm green rather than a cool green. So you can add more gold to it until you get it the way you like. And another good thing about this is that when you go to paint the base color, if you decide I want it to look a little bit different, maybe I want it to be lighter or darker, when you do your second coat, you can make that adjustment in the second coat. So like my green is a little bit lighter in this one. That doesn't bother me at all, so I may just leave it that way. But if you were like, oh, I really like that dark, almost black green, really strong forest green maybe would be a better way to describe it. And if you ordered any custom colors, you're just going to substitute whatever color in whatever place you want. So you don't have to follow exactly. The only thing is you'll just mix white with those colors that you picked, those colors you requested, rather than these colors, with the exception of red. So if you picked red and you mix white with it, you're going to end up with pink. So if you wanted like a red feather, just keep that in mind. So I'm going to dry this, and then we're going to do our second coats. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do our second coats. If you ran out of any of your colors when you were painting that first time, go ahead and remix them, just to make sure that you have enough to cover the whole feather. I keep wanting to call them leaves, but clearly these are not leaves, but that's just what I keep wanting to say. So just fill it in, and you can see how it's getting really nice and smooth. Now, when you're doing your second coat, I may have mentioned this before, but you want to make sure that that first coat is dry. I know I said that I was going to dry mine, but it won't cover over nicely if it isn't dry. Really all your paintbrush is going to be doing, instead of adding more paint and making it smoother, it's going to be pulling the paint off the canvas. So I like to get the point of that brush into the points of the feathers, because it's almost the same shape as the feathers. It's like a point, so if you get that point down in there, it's going to be much easier to get. So you're just going to trace the edge and then fill in. You can also just trace the whole thing and then fill in the middle. You don't have to do it like I'm doing, where I'm just tracing and filling at the same time. Depending on the image, sometimes that works better for me to trace the whole thing first. It's just up to you for this. but you can see it's also cleaning up your edges nicely where the background didn't quite, where the background accidentally went into the shapes, like I said it would when we had those crazy edges at the beginning. So you want to make sure after you've rinsed your brush that you dry it off really good, or it might drip down. Your paint color might drip down the canvas and not cover as much as you want it to. Okay, so we're going to let this dry. Clean that edge just a little bit more. We're going to let this dry, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. You may want to double check and make sure that you don't need a touch-up coat, like if there are any splatters or anything kind of poking through, you can just let it dry and then just kind of lightly cover those little areas. All right, guys, so next we're going to go ahead and mix up our dark brown. This is a dark brown, but if you wanted to, you could also choose to do it black. Either way is totally fine, but I'm going to show you how to mix it. So we're going to take our brown pod and we're going to take our black pod. We're going to scoop from that. So I'm going to take a brown scoop first. Again, it's always best to try to mix enough to cover you for the whole thing. But if you don't, on this in particular, the black and brown is pretty easy to rematch. So just take a few scoops, and then I'm going to take a small scoop of black. You always want to be sparing with your black at the beginning because it's very strong, so it's very easy to overwhelm the brown and just end up with only black. So just mix it until you're happy with the particular shade, just adding a little bit of black at the time until you get a really nice chocolatey dark brown. I'm going to add just a little more paint to this pile just to make sure I have enough to cover it. Okay, and now I'm just going to take my size 8 round brush and kind of roll it on its side to take any excess off. Particularly when you're doing that, you want to get the excess off the back part of the brush. It doesn't matter so much on the front. And then you're just going to take, and I like to start at the top. And the size 8 round brush is basically the same size as the thickness of this little oval, this circle. So you can just use the thickness of the brush to fill it all in at once. But if you'd rather, I'll show you real quick how to do it with your small brush. If you'd rather use that, what you'll do is you're just going to take and you're going to go right along the edge. And then you're going to take and go right along the edge like this. And then you're just going to fill it in. So either way works just fine, whichever one is most comfortable for you. I'm going to go back to the size 8 round brush. And you can do as many coats over this as you want to get it to the right shade. So notice I'm doing long, smooth strokes and not short, choppy strokes for the most part. All right, and then I'm just going to repeat the same thing on the bottom, but this time I'm going to swap to the smaller brush. Just tracing around the edge until all the space is filled. Just be really patient with yourself to get that line as good as you want it. And then you can look around and see, okay, maybe I want to smooth that out a little bit. You can take your small brush and make any finer adjustments to the circle, like maybe here. I want to even that out a little bit, maybe up here. So I'm basically just re-smoothing everything. Okay, and then we're going to trace the middle part. So what I don't want you to do is to freak out about all these little lines. They're not hard, they're just, if you, I don't know if you can see it from that distance, but I will bring it a little closer, maybe you can see that. Let me get this glare off. So you can see the lines underneath here. So what they are really is just a leaf shape. So they're not hard, they're just leaf shapes that are interlocking together. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your small round brush, and I like to start on the edge and work to the middle. That's what's most comfortable for my hand. And you're just going to take and trace over the line until it connects in the middle. One long smooth stroke. Just like that. And if it's a little wobbly, like mine's a little wobbly right now, that's not a big deal. Because once you have them all interlocking together, you're really not going to be able to see the difference. If your brush runs out halfway through, no problem. Just take another little dab and go back into it again. If you're intimidated by doing this, you're like, oh, I just don't think I can do it. Something else that we've had some people choose to do is use a black Sharpie and tracing over the lines again. So whatever is most comfortable for you. If you're uncomfortable with using the brush, just grab any old household Sharpie. Just make sure that it's not something washable, because they just don't stick very well to the slick surfaces of acrylic, as well as they're not very permanent. You just got to take your time and be patient. So you might have noticed that I'm starting from the middle now, and that's because I have an easier time pulling down than I do going up and getting a smooth stroke. All right, so then you may want to take, and I'm just going to go around the circle, touching up any thin areas that I see. If it's not dry, you may have a hard time doing that right now. I spread mine pretty thin, so it's pretty dry right now, but just use the blow dryer if it's not dry enough for you, and you can just smooth out a little bit of the areas that need a little extra attention. All right, so now I'm going to go in the center here, and these are just leaf shapes as well. So pulling from the top and going down. This is basically like doing one of those flowers that sometimes you draw on the edge of your notebook. If you ever doodled in school, that's basically what you're doing. It's just little petals. Alrighty, so I'm going to rinse my brush out just to get a nice clean point. Again, sometimes if you use the brush too much, it will the bristles will kind of fray. So just adding a little bit more water to it to rinse it out and then dry it again will fix that for you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to draw our little strings for the beads before we dry it. So we're going to just take, and if you're concerned about it like touching the beads, what I suggest you do is take it and turn it upside down, because it's easier to like touch the bead and pull down towards the dream catcher than it is to go from the bottom up. So you just put it right on the edge and then draw a straight line, or a relatively straight line. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight because we are going to add those beads to it. So start off with your feathers. If you want, you can also like flip your reference upside down too if you need something to compare it to. Sometimes mentally flipping something is a challenge. And so this one here, we're just going to draw a straight line from about here down. So just take and they don't have to be exactly the same length, they just need to be similar lengths. And you can do as many of these strings as you want, really. Like if you want to do them differently, or you want to do them uneven. This is your painting, and this part right here really just doesn't matter if you want to do it exactly the same or not. All right, so then you rinse your brush out, and we're going to dry this part so that way we can add our beads on top of it without the brown smudging into the colors. Okay, so now that it's dry, we're going to take our white, and we're going to start by doing the white little ties around here. So we're just going to take and put them basically where the point of each of those little flower petals or teardrops or whatever makes sense in your brain. I'm using the small brush, but the big brush will work as well. And I'm not even really doing perfect circles. I'm kind of doing an oval or a dash. So doing these little details is where it starts to all come together. You're just going to do some right here on each one of the flower petals. So I'm just taking it along the edge, adding a little dot. Now, of course, I'm doing white because that is going to give me the most contrast with that dark color. However, if you want to do a different color, this is technically supposed to be like thread, so you could use whatever color you want. And then I'm just going to take and fill in the white dots that are in here. If you didn't cover over them with the background color, you still want to paint them white because acrylic paint has a different sheen than the canvas does. So we want to just make sure that it all looks like it's been hand painted. So I'm just going to fill that in and just doing it very lightly. We're not going to need 2 coats or anything like that. And you can do the beads different colors too. Like you don't have to follow this exactly. You can always come back and touch it up too. Okay, I think, no, there's a couple down here. There's one on the end, one on the end over here. You can see my strings are not perfectly straight, but it looks fine that way because it looks like, you know, the wind could have picked up the ends a little bit. Okay, so now that I have those beads in place, you know, I'm going to need my white anyway to do some of the details in here as well. So if I've forgotten any beads, we'll do that then. So if your colors from doing your feathers are still wet, you can use those for the next beads. But if you need to remix it, you might want to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to start with my purple. It really doesn't matter where you start. It just, you just want to make sure that you're looking carefully at your reference, or not if you would rather just go with the flow and do whatever beads colors you want to do. Maybe the theme of your room or the room that it's going in has like more blue than purple, so you could do more blue beads rather than purple or yellow or pink. So just take and do little dots along the edges, and we're going to add some highlights to these at the end. So don't feel like, oh, if they're just looking like little circles, they're going to look shiny when we get there. And then you just move on to your next color in no particular order. I'm going to put one here. So you can just trace the edge and then fill it in. Okay, I think I have all my green now. So I'm just going to rinse my brush and move on to the next. So I'm going to do one more color and then I'm going to pause and finish doing all the beads. You can finish doing your beads and then we'll continue on to the next step. So something else you guys can do with these pink beads, I'll show you when we get to doing some more of the feathers, the feather details, is we can add a little bit of red to the beads and it'll make them have more contrast with the background, like with the shadows. Okay, so I'm going to finish that up. And I'm going to have blow dried it by the time we get back. So you may want to make sure it's dry before you join me for the next thing. All right, so for the feather details, we're just going to take our pure colors without the white mixed into it. And first we're going to take and identify where the middle of each of the feathers are, so that way we know where to put all of the white details. So I'm just going to take from the dots, from the little bead there, and go straight down the length of that feather. And that's just adding that little quill part, and it's going to make figuring out where all the white details go so much easier. Now, the one thing to keep in mind with this one's a little bit different, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, so is this one. You're going to take a little bit of red and mix it into that pink. I'm going to grab just a little bit more. My pink has dried out on me a little. So we get like a dark pink, and we're just going to go right down the length of that. And this is what I was saying about the beads earlier. If the pink that you have, you feel like it's too pastel, just take and put a little bit of that shadowy pink right over the top if you want more contrast with the background. So that's kind of up to you. If you need to see a comparison, just rewind to the beginning of right before I put the pink on, the dark pink on there. The thing is, when you're switching between all these colors, you want to make sure that you rinse your brush out pretty good so we don't get any unwanted colors. And then just take the pure green. I don't need to rinse that yet. Now the yellow, you can take this mustardy color and just do one line down the length of the mustardy color, or you can take a little gold, or sorry, take that mustardy color and bring it down the length of the yellow, or you can take the mustard color and add it to that yellow pile that you have, so that way it's not quite as dark. So it's a little bit lighter now because I mixed it with the yellow. That's what we did over here in this example, but if you are good with the contrast, go ahead and go for it with just that mustard color. Now for the purple, we're going to take just the plain purple and go right down the center. Starting to look a little more finished. So cute. All right, so for our white details, we're going to start with the dashes, and you don't have to do them exactly like they are in the reference, but the one thing that you want to do is make sure that they're pointed towards the quill. You don't want them to be like, you know, going up and down or like going across it. You want them to be pointed at an angle towards it. So just little dashes. I'm still using my detail brush. You just go down every single one of them, doing those dashes before we do the dots, because the dashes are like the guides for the dots. You just want to make sure you leave some space for the dots if you're doing the dashes right now and you want to do more. Just make sure there's a couple spaces left for dots. Okay, so while you have that white, why don't you go ahead and check over the rest of the beads. Like I noticed I missed one right here. And then we're going to take and do a couple highlights. So you just take and do a little dot or a little dash on each of the beads. If they're still wet, I dried mine, but if yours are still wet, you may want to pause and dry it. Otherwise, that white's just going to blend right in and make a big mess. So you just put little dashes. Okay. All right, so I guess there's one more right here that didn't get it. The yellow ones, it doesn't stand out as much on. Okay, so we are entering the home stretch. We're going to take a dot of the white here. We're just going to do little dots along the length and in the point. Now this is the back of the brush, remember. So you just need to remember to dip it back into the white a little more frequently than you think you need to. The back of the brush is not technically designed for painting, so it doesn't hold a lot of paint at once. And you don't have to do the dots exactly like this. I'm kind of following the general dash pattern that I made, where they're kind of going parallel to that, and then in the points. But you can do it differently than that. You can like fill the whole thing with dots if you want. Oop, forgot one here. I'll just put a little dot on that bead. It can be easy to miss little beads or details in this one because there are so many. But it's nothing that you can't catch in hindsight. can use the point of your brush too for this if you'd rather. I just think that it's easier to control the shape of the dot. Like sometimes when you use the point of the brush, it ends up looking like a dash and not a dot, not a perfectly round dot. So if you want to do the point of your brush, I'd grab just a sheet of paper and practice on that first. And you can use a different color if it's a white sheet of paper. Okay. Now my current example does not have a little hanging piece right here, but I'm going to add one on this. It was in my original drawing, and you're just going to trace over that. You don't have to have that there if you don't want to, but most people like to have it. And then you can just take a look over your painting, make sure that you're happy with all the things that you've done, make any adjustments before you call it finished. Awesome job, guys. I hope you enjoyed creating your masterpiece. Don't forget to share it with us. We'd love to see what you're working on. Thanks, guys. See you soon.